In just 6 minutes, Kamala Harris shook the federal courtroom, exposing the true nature of a white judge and saved Jasmine Crockett with only 7 words, all in front of 3 live TV cameras. The big question is, how did she turn a normal trial into a nightmare for the person sitting in the seat of justice? At 8 a.m., the federal courthouse in the Western District was filled with tension, as if even the walls knew something big was about to happen. Jasmine Crockett found herself at the center of a legal storm, grilled, dismissed, and even humiliated in front of cameras by a stern federal judge whose tone sparked controversy. Just when it seemed like the courtroom drama would tip into irreversible disgrace for Crockett, Vice President Kamala Harris made a stunning intervention. With a calm yet commanding presence, Harris uttered 7 powerful words that not only turned the tide in Crockett's favor but also catalyzed a ripple effect through the legal fabric of America. What started as a moment of public embarrassment became a defining chapter in U.S. legal history, and the story behind it is nothing short of extraordinary. Judge Milton Gray, a man whose decades on the bench were marked by strict interpretations of the law and a staunch adherence to traditional courtroom decorum, had never before faced such a politically charged atmosphere. From the moment Crockett took the stand, it was clear that the odds were stacked. The judge's tone was clipped and cold, offering none of the neutral detachment typically expected of a federal jurist. With each word Crockett spoke, Gray interrupted, berated, and ultimately humiliated her, using his authority not to seek truth but to publicly reprimand her for daring to push back. He sneered at her credentials, questioned her understanding of legislative processes, and even suggested that she was more concerned with media appearances than governance. The room, full of journalists, aides, and observers, grew increasingly uneasy as the line between legal inquiry and character assassination blurred. The spectacle grew more painful with every passing minute. Crockett, to her immense credit, never lost composure. Her voice, though increasingly strained, never cracked. She answered each hostile question with as much professionalism as the moment allowed, refusing to descend into theatrics or personal retaliation. Still, the damage was visible. Each snide remark from the judge chipped away at the dignity of her role, not just as a defendant but as a sitting member of Congress. For those watching, especially young people and communities of color, the scene was infuriating. It felt like watching an entire system try to put someone in her place simply for having the audacity to rise above expectations. Within hours, clips of the courtroom exchange went viral. The contrast between the judge's hostile tone and Crockett's controlled, respectful responses was stark. On social media platforms like X, TikTok, and YouTube, millions began dissecting the footage. Prominent figures in law, politics, and civil rights weighed in, calling the judge's behavior not only inappropriate but emblematic of a deeper rot within the judiciary. Supporters of Crockett rallied around her, hailing her grace under fire. Yet there were others, those entrenched in traditional power structures, who saw her as a threat to the status quo. This case, they hoped, would remind other upstarts of what happens when you challenge the machinery of power. But this time, the machinery stalled. What none of those critics anticipated was that someone with more clout and visibility than even the judge himself was watching closely. Vice President Kamala Harris, no stranger to the complexities and corrosiveness of systemic injustice, had followed the story from the beginning. Harris, a former prosecutor and California Attorney General, knew the courtroom's psychological games better than most. She had faced those same raised eyebrows, dismissive tones, and condescending rebukes herself. Watching Crockett be diminished and ridiculed not on the strength of facts but on the basis of personality and power dynamics struck a chord too deep to ignore. Harris didn't just empathize, she acted. In an extraordinary move, Harris showed up at the following session of the hearing unannounced. She didn't call a press conference or tweet about her presence. Instead, she quietly entered the courtroom, sat in the gallery, and waited. When the judge entered the room and saw her, his face momentarily stiffened. The presence of the Vice President of the United States, especially one who had walked her own path through the legal and political battlefield, changed everything. For once, the judge hesitated before speaking. The room was no longer his alone. Power had entered from another direction, female, black, and unshakably composed. Crockett looked over and saw Harris in the gallery. A moment passed between them, unspoken solidarity, recognition, support. That brief glance fortified her. But the real moment came when the judge, falling back into old habits, once again tried to lecture Crockett with paternalistic scorn. His voice rose. He pointed a finger. He questioned her qualifications again. And then, Harris stood up. The courtroom, frozen in surprise, watched as she took a breath and asked to be recognized. The judge granted it, albeit reluctantly. understanding that denying the vice president her voice would have consequences far beyond his control. Kamala Harris, in that moment, did not offer platitudes or grandstanding. She said 7 words that would echo across the country and become a defining moment in modern American legal history. This is not justice, it's judicial intimidation. Simple, calm, devastating. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Harris followed those 7 words with a measured, fact-laden dismantling of the judge's behavior. She detailed the principles of judicial neutrality, cited legal precedents that defined ethical boundaries, and explained how the abuse of judicial discretion could undermine democracy itself. This wasn't political theater, it was a constitutional intervention. In the days that followed, the media exploded with analysis. Constitutional scholars dissected Harris's intervention. Was it appropriate? Was it unprecedented? Could it spark reform? One thing was clear, her presence and those 7 words had shifted the national conversation. Judicial overreach, once a topic relegated to legal journals, was now a front-page issue. The federal court system, often shielded from scrutiny due to its perceived impartiality, now found itself under a microscope, and leading that wave of accountability was Kamala Harris, backed by a coalition of lawmakers, civil rights groups, and everyday citizens who had witnessed a breach of democratic norms. What followed was even more remarkable. Harris called for an independent ethics investigation into the conduct of Judge Gray. The request wasn't symbolic, she filed formal paperwork and pushed for congressional oversight hearings. Multiple lawmakers, both Democrat and Republican, agreed that Crockett's treatment raised serious red flags. Advocacy groups began to push for reforms requiring oversight panels in politically sensitive cases and mandatory annual training for federal judges on judicial bias. Meanwhile, universities and law schools began incorporating the incident into their case studies, analyzing not only the power dynamics on display but the role of public accountability in safeguarding democracy. For Jasmine Crockett, the impact was both personal and political. She emerged from the fire not weakened, but stronger and more visible than ever. Her approval ratings soared, donations to her campaign increased. More importantly, she had become a symbol, not of victimhood, but of resistance. She began speaking across the country, not just about her experience, but about how institutional reform is possible when people in power refuse to stay silent. She partnered with Harris on a legislative proposal named the Judicial Fairness and Accountability Act, which aimed to introduce new transparency measures in federal courts and create systems of recourse for public officials facing judicial misconduct. The act, currently under review in Congress, has gained bipartisan support. It proposes the creation of an independent oversight board for judicial conduct, mandatory public reporting of judicial reprimands, and legal protections for public officials subjected to undue judicial aggression. More than a legal reform bill, it's a cultural moment, proof that systems can be challenged, that dignity can be defended, and that the courtroom, often a symbol of power imbalance, can be reclaimed as a site of justice. Public sentiment continued to rally around Crockett and Harris. Their courage served as a wake-up call, reminding citizens of the fragile balance between law and power. Activists began organizing town halls and educational seminars focused on courtroom rights and the responsibilities of public officials. The conversation around implicit bias in legal proceedings took center stage. National networks aired specials on judicial behavior. For once, the robe of neutrality that shielded bad behavior was being pulled back, and what lay beneath it was exposed to the disinfecting light of public scrutiny. And through it all, Crockett remained grounded. She spoke openly about the emotional toll of that courtroom humiliation, but more importantly, about the strength she drew from Harris's support. In that room, she said during one interview, "I was told I didn't belong, but when Kamala Harris walked in, she told everyone, without raising her voice, that I did, that we all do." That message struck a chord across the nation, especially with young people who saw in Crockett's story a reflection of their own battles against authority and dismissal. Kamala Harris's decision to intervene was not without criticism. Some accused her of politicizing the judiciary, while others said her presence amounted to executive interference. But those voices were quickly drowned out by the outpouring of support from constitutional scholars who argued that when justice fails in the courtroom, those entrusted with public power must speak. Harris's actions did not bend the law, they reminded the nation of what the law is supposed to be: a shield, not a weapon. Today, the phrase "this is not justice, it's judicial intimidation" has become more than a courtroom quote. It's a rallying cry for fairness, a motto for those who believe in holding the powerful accountable. Harris and Crockett didn't just survive a political attack, they turned it into a movement. And in doing so, they proved that the strength of democracy lies not just in its laws, but in the people who dare to defend them. If you were moved by this powerful story of courage, accountability, and justice, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update on the real moments shaping our future.